So how does love work? When it works wonderful, it's incredible. When a man goes home with a woman who loves him all the days of his life, there's almost no greater blessing in life. When a woman has a man who loves her deeply, there's almost no greater gift she'll ever get. When it works wonderful, it's wonderful. But when it doesn't work well, there are a few things more painful. As I drove to the studio today, I had a long drive, and for the couple of hours that I was driving, the station that was tuned to was nothing but love songs. And as I listened to them, there were times it was so tender. I mean, so sweet. I thought about my own 41 years of marriage and my kids and their marriages and my parents and others. When love works as it ought to, it is incredible. But it's also interesting to note that as I took that long drive, over half of the songs were broken-hearted songs. They were about lives ripped up. They were great songs of lament. Love is pretty lost in this culture. I'm going to tell you right now, if you try to do what the neighbors have been doing, you'll get what the neighbors have gotten. And it's not very good. As God designed this concept of being in love and living in love for a lifetime, we're going to have to go back and figure something out. There's times I almost wish we had lost the recipe for fire instead of had a recipe for how to have a safe and joyful home. I'm not an expert on anything. I'm just a guy. But somehow in the sovereignty of God, God sort of put me at an intersection, put me in a world where I've spent time with marriages. I'm approaching 4,000 couples in problem marriage counseling. And those 4,000 couples, as I've gone through them, I realize there are some things that just become finally clear to me or anybody else. Good marriages are a choice. They're not a little bit of roll of the dice. It's not just a matter of chemistry, and we hope the chemistry can last for a lifetime. Good marriages are a choice, but we don't know how to choose it, and when we do choose it, we don't always know how to live that choice out. Right now, in our culture, in general, these are the stats you find. You go to any block in America, 5 houses on that block. When you go to that block and you go to each of those doors and you knock on those doors and you ask this key question: do you have the kind of marriage you want your children to have? The answers are not very good. Because when you ask that question, do you have the kind of marriage you want your children to have, 2 of those will say no. No. In fact, we either have a divorce or we talk about divorce a lot. Divorce is right at the edge. We're at the abyss of divorce. No, I don't want my children to have this because divorce is a part of our world. If I go to 2 other houses on that block, and I ask the question, do you have the kind of marriage you want your children to have? The answer will be, no. We'll stay married, and there are many good things about our marriage, and we're okay. This okay is not a rousing endorsement. No, we would definitely want our children to have a better marriage than this. You got to go to the 5th one. You got to go to the 5th house. That's only 20% of all homes. Do you have the kind of marriage you want your children to have? They will say yes, with enthusiasm and endorsement. Yes. In this culture, we're going to have to figure out how to make marriages work. I don't know who you are as you're watching this. Maybe you're single, thinking about how do I prepare my life and what do I do in my life to prepare for it, and how do I find who to marry? Maybe you're in a marriage that's one of these. You go, no, that's not what I want. Maybe you're a strong, good marriage, and you just want to know how to help other people because you're not sure, well, how did we end up with such a good marriage? This series we're going to go through is designed for singles and married, marriages that might be struggling, and marriages that are rejoicing. Let's talk about it. What's the issue? Oh, what's going on? Well, let's start with the most basic building block that I know of. It begins like this. Everybody is born with the instinctive desire to love and be loved. That's in you from the time you hit this world. Be ye saint or be ye a scoundrel. It's an instinctive desire in your life. Instincts are pretty amazing. I grew up on a cow-calf operation, a ranch. And to this day, it still is amazing to me. You'll watch a calf be born. This is a calf that has 4 little shaky legs, or little sticks almost. He's never stood on his legs, but somehow he knows instinctively he's to go to something. And he stands up, and he's never had one drop of milk. He's never had one picture of what milk is. And yet this calf falls, gets up and fights, bumps the side of a cow with its forehead several times, hunting for something it has no experience with, because it lives and dies off milk. Instinct. Birds migrate around the world because of instincts. Whales migrate over vast portions of the ocean of instincts. Everybody is born with the instinctive desire to love and be loved. I'm going to say it again. Be ye saint or be ye scoundrel. You go to the deepest part of a prison, there's a man who wants to love his family. He wants to love his mom. He wants to love his kids. He wants to love a spouse that he had in his life. Everybody has the instinctive desire. You say, well, that should settle the issue then, because love is instinctive. No, that's not the rest of the answer. While we're born with the instinctive desire to love and be loved, here's the catch. The ability to love is not instinctive. The ability to love requires wholeness. To love somebody really doesn't come out of the heart. Everybody has that. Every fool will fall in love, myself included. Every fool falls in love, in fact, many times. Out of the heart comes a desire to love, if I can use it as in a metaphor sense. But here's the problem. The ability to love is not instinctive. The ability to love comes out of your backbone. It comes out of your character. It comes out of your wholeness. And so what happens when somebody wants to love is they have the instinctive desire to do it, and then they reach into their character to live out the things that love requires. And what happens is the person who is not whole, who is not wise, who is not mature, who has never grown up, that individual reaches into their backbone and they come out empty-handed. Because love requires a set of skills. It requires that you be patient when you don't want to be patient. It requires you be gentle when anger is with the fire that you feel. It requires you have the courage to confront things that other people might avoid. It requires that you ask for forgiveness when you're not entirely sure it's 100% your fault. Love requires a wholeness in our life. And when the wholeness is not there, here's what you have. You have somebody who tries hard, but ends up being very unable to do so. I don't know what family you came from, and I know I can get pretty close to some deep emotional issues. But can I say, your dad wanted to love you. There was nothing so broken about you. There was nothing so inadequate about you. There was nothing so ugly about you that your dad didn't want to love you. Your dad wanted to love you. I'm confident of that. I've lived enough life with enough people. Your dad cried at night because he couldn't quite figure out how to love your mom or to love you. Your dad got in the truck at times and just pounded the steering wheel of his truck as he drove away, because your dad wanted to love you. Your dad didn't wake up at 5:30 in the morning and go, how do I mess up my kids' heads today? Your dad wanted to love you, but here's the problem. When your dad reached into his backbone, his character, his wholeness, to live out the things that love required, he kept coming up empty-handed. He kept digging a well that was dry for him because the lack of wholeness in his life. Eventually, you can blame yourself for a while, but eventually you can't keep blaming yourself without it switching over, because the second part of sin will cause you to become accusatory. And so then he began to blame you. Now this is your fault. If you were just this, if you were just that, if your mother was just this, or maybe it's the mom story, if your dad were just this. And so the story of our lives, oftentimes, is not that somebody is so unlovable or so broken they couldn't be loved. The problem is the one who wants to love them doesn't have what's required to live it out. There are many a couple that stood in front of a preacher or a judge. And the man sort of stood here and held a woman's hand, and the woman still stood here and held a man's hands. And they made promises they meant with all of their heart. And they walked down an aisle together, but the reason it wasn't a happy ever after is because they made promises they couldn't keep. Oh, they'll blame each other. Oh my goodness, if you just were this, if you just were that. But all of that's a smokescreen. It's just not true. Wholeness. I guess I've got a conclusion out of most of the couples I've worked with. Most couples are not having marriage problems. Most couples that are struggling are having personal problems that are tearing up the marriage. And you don't solve marriage issues by working on marriage tricks and some kind of marriage technique. What it amounts to is couples finally have to own this truth. Marriage is made for grown-ups. Love, deep, abiding, long-term love is made for grown-ups. And if you've never grown up enough, what happens is you end up unable to live out what you want to live out, and you end up putting pressure on a mate to try to make you whole, and nobody can make you whole. Let me talk this through just a little bit. Let's stay on this a little bit. Wholeness is actually a long journey. You prepare for wholeness. You recognize that in some simple little ways. I don't care who it is. Let me call a guy off the street. It could be me. But you say, I want you to try really, really hard to run a marathon. Well, I don't care how hard the guy tries, pull me or anybody else and say, I want you to run 26.2 miles today, trying harder. I don't care how hard he tries, running every single step for 26.2 miles, probably ain't going to do. You train to a marathon. Now, if you train to it, you can do it. Training to it. But you train to it. You don't just try harder. It may be rather asinine what I'm about to say, but if somebody would say, Randy, I'd like you to do my brain surgery, the last answer you want to hear is, well, I'll try. See, trying harder wouldn't do well. Now, you let me train? Give me 11 years. Let me train to it. I can train to do the brain surgery. Training is required for anything significant in life, especially in this matter of love. So what happens if you grow up in a shallow culture? A culture that doesn't help you train to the things that are required. Then we become a fatherless culture. And we become a culture where moms don't always know how to love their kids. And we become a culture where moms and dads are making promises they can't keep. At some point in time, the best news I can give you is that if you decide to pursue wholeness, you will be shocked at what happens on this issue of love. Wholeness probably involves three things. I mean, there's more than that, but for our purposes today. Wholeness requires that you know what your identity is. You know who you are. We come into life, and life begins to put 100,000 Post-it notes on us. Post-it notes that some are just lies. But you get Post-it notes of all kinds. They're notes like, you're not pretty enough, you're not skinny enough, you're not talented enough. Post-it notes of, we really like you because you always measure up. And the rest of that Post-it note is, if you ever don't measure up, we won't. And so you have all these Post-it notes on you. And you're trying to figure out who you are. And junior high is oftentimes trying to get people to affirm us. Tell me who I am. Make me feel good about myself. Help me have my identity. High school and college and adulthood oftentimes is people who have lost who they are. And when you don't know who you are, life is really, really hard. How identity should come is, yeah, I grow up in a world, but I met my Creator and my Redeemer. And I met the living God who said, I made you in my image, and your worth and value doesn't come because you hit baseballs over fences or golf balls a long way. That your worth and value doesn't come because you're pretty enough, skinny enough, talented enough, and well-liked enough. Your worth and value comes because I made you in my image. You are the stuff of me. And we're designed to live with a living God who speaks our identity into us. But we have our own sin, and we get confused about our own identity, and the world gets confused. And so we become these kids almost like playing on dirt piles, trying to play king of the hill, trying to figure out, if I could just be successful at something, I'll know who I am. You won't have maturity if you don't know your identity. There's a second thing we have to have, and that is you have to have emotional maturity. God gave us incredible emotions, a wide range of them, 30 to 35 emotions, depending on how you want to count them. And I have this box. And if I become skilled enough to take my emotions and to weave them into my identity, I begin to live out what it means to live in the image of God. Get to go slay dragons and live large and have a grand adventure. I get to have the courage to do what I ought to do and the gentleness to forgive. But if I'm unskilled at this box of emotions, I become a little bit like a 4-year-old with a bat in their hand. You don't want to give a 4-year-old a bat. And you don't want to be around some people who've never become skilled with their emotions. They want the right thing, but The third thing you have to have for wholeness is you have to have pretty unshakable ground that you plant your feet for morality. That I don't blow in the wind, and that right is right. The truth is, I don't think it's a set of laws that ever holds us right. It's ultimately when I know who I am in the image of God, that I know who I am. And I don't lie because lying is wrong. I don't lie because that's not who I am. I don't steal because that's not who I am. I don't embezzle because that's not who I am. My identity begins to run through all of these things. Wholeness. In a perfect world, how would we get wholeness? Well, in a perfect world, here's the process. It would go like this. We begin that we come into life without any of those things. We don't have any wholeness. Our backbone doesn't have any substance in it. And so we come in horizontal. Now, where we want to end up is able to stand on our own 2 feet with wholeness. But we don't have it when we come. It's the reason your mama walked you miles up and down a hallway to a house, and she sung over you and she patted you. That's the reason we hug our kids and hang on to them, is because we're passing on to them worth and value and identity and all the things we do. And so little kids don't have their own, and they borrow from their parents. You get to the next little stage in life, and not only do you borrow from your parents, you begin to borrow from adolescent friends. And that becomes a common thing. And so that's why you see little girls in first and second grade, man, they go to the playground, they go to the bathroom, anywhere they go, a little group of them, amoebas going together. Well, why do they do that? It's because they're borrowing their happiness and their contentment. They're borrowing their morality. You'll see it with little boys. They don't have their own. They borrow them. It's the reason you can sort of joke about it, but take the best little 4th grade boy. I mean, he's an incredible little boy. Everybody goes, this is a great kid. And he is. Until his cousins from the big city come. And his cousins from the big city, the next thing you know, they're out shooting streetlights out with a BB gun. And you go, what? You must be a hypocrite. No, this little kid isn't a hypocrite. He's just doing what little boys do. They don't have their own, so they borrow the morality. Now, what should happen is you borrow from family, you borrow from friends, but at some point in time, as God designed us in his image, I begin to be able to detach from some of those things, certainly the brokenness of some of those things. And the Lord and I begin to have a dialogue, and the Lord begins to speak blessings over my life, and the Lord begins to open my eyes to things, and I end up with the Lord and my family and my friends. But I know who I am, and I know what I am, and I have wholeness in my life. There's been a real transformation and even redemption. I know who I am. So what should happen is a little boy grows up and comes to his own 2 feet, and a little girl grows up and comes to her feet, and somewhere along the line, 2 whole people come. And when she says, I give you my life. Let's go live it together. She gives her life to a man who not only wants to love her, but he can reach into his backbone and live out what's required. And when he says, I want to share life with you, and I want to live out our dreams, not just mine, this woman is safe with him the rest of her days because of this wholeness they both have. But that's not what happens. You and I both know that. It happens some, but not often. You see, here's what happens is we have a world that begins a little like this. We're horizontal and we borrow from parents. And the more broken a family is, the less borrowing we can even do healthy there. And we begin to borrow from adolescent friends, and the more unhealthy a culture is, sometimes even less healthy we can borrow from friends. But what should have happened is when we became to this point, well, it should have gone to something better, but instead it became, hey, the secret to life is a boyfriend or girlfriend. You just need a boyfriend or girlfriend. You have a hole in your chest. You're not quite right. You're not happy. You're not content. But if you just had a boyfriend or girlfriend in your life, you'd be fine. And so mama started throwing these crazy parties for fifth grade kids and all the stuff that begins to occur. And we begin to have junior high with all the dating stuff. And suddenly what happens is we borrow from parents, we borrow from friends, and now we begin to get in this Ken and Barbie world, this dating relationship. And it's what we know. It's what we think's supposed to happen. But instead of being love, it's actually a crutch. Oh, it's well intended, but it's two users. The number one drug in America is not marijuana or alcohol. The number one drug in America is another person. We tend to use other people to try to fix what's a hole in us. Several years ago, I walked through the foyer of our congregation, the church. There was a second grade girl that I knew very well there, and she was just brokenhearted and weeping. And I went and sat down beside her. I knew her well and her family well, and I put my arm around her and said, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" And she just cried against my chest for a little while before she could get her words. And then she said this. She said, "Mr. Gariss, none of the boys in my class will go with me." Well, good grief, I'm trying to maintain a straight face now. I mean, I'm laughing on the inside going, how is this girl so brokenhearted because none of the boys will go with you? Where are you going to go? The monkey bars? The water fountain? I mean, what do you mean? It won't go with you. But she tore my heart out with the second part of that sentence. Because the second part of that sentence is the mirror of our world. Because the second part she used was this, and Mr. Gariss, in my class, if none of the boys will go with you, you're a nobody. This Ken and Barbie world has thrown us into love relationships when we have unfinished business in our life and we make promises we can't keep. I get no jollies breaking anybody up. I don't want to do that. But some of you in your dating relationship, you need to turn to the other person and say, I do love you. And I want a lifetime love with you. But I have unfinished business in my life. And I need to take a step back and I need to grow up. For some of you in your marriage, you need to turn to your mate and say, I put way too much pressure on you. I've tried to make you to be the answer to my own personal immaturity. And I've blamed you for all the swinging emotions, and I've blamed you for all the frustration I felt, and truth is, I haven't grown up. Now, here's the good news. There is a king of the universe who has stepped into this toy box we live in, and who said, come to me. I'm going to tell you there is a way to become whole. As I finish this session, I just want to hit one passage. In Proverbs chapter 25, verse 28, there's this powerful little passage. It goes like this, that a man without discipline, a man without wisdom, a man without wholeness is like a city without walls. Now, what in the world does that mean? a man without discipline, wholeness, he's just like a city without walls. I want you to picture two cities, one with walls and one without. In both cities, they want the same things. They tuck their kids into bed at night. They kiss them on the forehead. In both cities, they have anniversaries and birthday parties and pony rides. And in both cities, they put the winter wheat aside just like they can plant it next spring. But here's the difference. In the city with walls, come next spring, the kids are safe, mom is safe, the wheat is there. But in the city without walls, it was all pillaged and carried off. It was stolen. You see, the most dangerous man or woman on the face of the earth is not the scoundrel. The scoundrel, we figure them out. We take a step back. The most dangerous man or woman on the face of the earth is the person who wants the right thing, who talks about the right thing, who dreams about the right thing, but they have never come to enough wholeness to be able to bring the thing they want to bring. Daddies, get wholeness in your life so you can love your kids. Mates, get wholeness in your life so you can love your kids. We'll pick this up.